All right, folks, a lot of controversy on this year's event. And one of the things that I just want to focus on is just going after the facts. Judge events, there's always going to be some gripe left or right on a lot of the decisions. And some of the things that I want to help you guys all understand is how we come up with our scores, what's the format, how we judge individual lines up against each other, and give you guys a little bit more informed on how we come up between each lines. And it really falls on the viewers, all of you, as really confusing. So I get it. I feel for you, and I understand where all your frustrations are coming from.
The fact is, if you ignore the details or chalk any of them up as irrelevant, these were almost all podium caliber runs these guys threw down this year when compared to years past. The men's field is super deep. Every detail must be taken into consideration, and what we saw in the natural evolution of this sport and all big mountain freeride sports actually is that one guy starts throwing tricks. If you want to compete with him, you've got to start tricking too. Next, someone starts tricking the big stuff. You got to start tricking the big stuff too. And then when almost everyone is tricking the big stuff, unless your line rides like T-Max, you better be tricking pretty much everything if you want to win. The reality is that's just where the level is now in 2024. Add tricks to 40, 60, 70 foot plus step downs and doubles, and it doesn't make it less free ride or too slope style. These are all individually scoped, insanely steep big mountain lines with a bunch of exposure. I'll talk about line choice and how it's weighted, knowing exactly what it feels like to stand on top of every one of these features. Every single guy that cracked the top had a bunch of super legit, high consequence, big mountain features, upwards of 40 feet. And I'll talk about technicality and tricks, because what really separates the Shimon and Semenuk from Tom and the others whose runs were really close is that those two tricked the crap out of everything.
So I want to bring you through Semenuk and Godziek's run here. Kind of point out a few things. Both tricking the first feature. Brendog with a truck, Godziek with the fronty, rolling into their upper section. Semenuk flip canned the feature that Zinc went down on, where Godziek went off the finger down into the Price is Right, and Godziek stepping into his biggest, most prominent feature, which is the Price is Right. Very large, nice buff landing straight into a case, where Semenuk dropped into a big mountain rowdy line, bunch of technical features leading into his trick jump that was a bit of a hip. Definitely some exposure there, where Shimon went a little rider's left, did some tricks on some features, and then finishing off into his big 3-drop into his final feature, which was the double flip on a big old double, and he lofted the crap out of it, where Semenuk came over into his opposite tail whip onto a lily pad. Now this is really what set him apart, was the opposite tail whip onto that lily pad. And if you've ever done a tail whip, let alone an opposite tail whip, the technicality of doing that off of a drop into a lily pad with a ton of exposure really just set the tone. And that was the one thing that set it apart between Shimon's run and another. Both were full of banger tricks with solid features. And what really separated the two apart, where it really boiled down to, was Semenuk's Oppo whip into the double stager and Shimon's Price is Right flip step down. The landing itself is quite buff. There's lots of room for error, which also comes into a big factor for myself when I'm looking at all these features. I'll look at every in-run and out-run. What's the exposure levels? Like, what happens if you crash? That also gets factored into the NAR score in terms of the line technicality. So back to Shimon's Price is Right feature. A bunch of guys all flipped it, obviously not on the same longer. So the difference between, say, Silva's and Shimon's is like roughly around 10 feet of difference, because Silva's was a little bit pushed forward, where Shimon's was back a little bit more. And so that just separates just a little bit. Same height, mind you, just a little bit further forward. So basically you're ending up with a little bit longer gap versus a little bit shorter gap. Both very difficult, but you go down to stats, and that's how you can differentiate the two between each other. So back to Shimon's flip step down. It was insane big. The exit was rather safe in comparison to we go over to Semenuk's, and obviously the amplitude wasn't as big as Shimon's, but where it squeaked it above it was the technicality and the exposure. Now, describe you a little bit about that double drop. So that first takeoff to the first lily pad was 26 feet. Obviously, as you saw in the broadcast, he overshot it and he barely got his front tire down before he had to exit onto the second stage. So just the double drop in itself, it has more exposure, because if you make one little mistake, you're basically sending it off the second one at a distance far greater than Shimon's flip step down. And on both sides, there's tons of exposure with a bunch of rocks, a bunch of nasty terrain that you're going to fall into and get very, very hurt. So with Semenuk dropping off that first drop and doing an opposite tail whip, the technicality just goes through the roof. His trick score goes through the roof. Obviously, you bring it back over to Shimon's, it's a flip. It's super big. It's nasty. It's got him on the amplitude. But where it really just inched it over was the technicality of the opposite tail whip into a double stager with a ton of exposure. And then if you want to sprinkle a little bit more difference on the top, yes, he did case two of his features, which it didn't really put him off his bike balance, but still it's something to note, where when you have such a close run, you really have to fall back on those really minor indiscrepancies to really differentiate the two. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people get really hung up on one big feature, one big move, but really as judges, it really boils down to finding a way to differentiate the two and seeing which is going to stand higher than the other on any given day. And I'm going to go down the list in terms of a lot of people's gripes. And then Van Steenbergen. I had him in third, and reason I had him in third was he sent the biggest thing in freeride history, a massive front flip on one of the biggest features we've ever seen in Rampage history, and arguably big mountain history. And so you can't really take that away. But then on the flip side, regarding to separating that from Shimon's and Semenuk's, he basically didn't make the jump after his front flip. He cased it. And then he also missed a bunch of features in terms of tricking, where you compare it to the riders above him, Shimon and Semenuk. They basically top to bottom run absolutely killed it. They were super fast. They were confident. They charged into every feature with speed and execution, and they were tricking the crap out of it. Yes, these are tricks, and yes, a lot of people are not too stoked on just the slope style thing, infiltrating into big mountain. But you got to remember that since the beginning, almost the very beginning, and you can hate me all you want for bringing tricks into the backcountry, but this is what we all as riders want. We want to do big tricks on big features. And disclaimer, every single one of those athletes dropped into a really big mountain. So any one of those athletes, I don't care what they did, it's still a big mountain line, and it's all steep, it's all scary. And when it comes to the TV, it doesn't show you in actuality how it actually is. And you have to stand on those features in person to see and grasp that massive expanse of nothing but air, no trees, and how the mountain just rolls off, and it just takes your heart and brings it in your throat when you're coming up to a blind takeoff where all you can see is the valley below. It's some of the landings might be buff and buttered out, but that allows athletes to go bigger and further and do bigger tricks. You can definitely keep it rough and loose, but we used to do that years ago. We used to flip over the bars all the time. So now we don't want to eat crap and end up in the hospital. So we make sure our landings are safe so that we can give ourselves the best chance possible to get down that mountain and do all the tricks that we all want to do. I'm speaking for the collective here of all the athletes. We all want to do tricks. That's we love tricks. It's what excites us. It brings us joy when we set a goal and we're like, oh man, I'd like to flip that or spin that or do a crazy trick off that. And when you accomplish it, you're stoked. So that's, I'm kind of speaking for the riders here, but I'm sure most will agree with me. We all want to do rad stuff. And then when we trickle down to the other bigger controversies, which is Brendog, I want to focus on Luke Whitlock's run and line in here. So I'm going to compare them pound for pound. So Luke Whitlock was below Brendog on the scorecard. And also, once again, don't focus on scores. Focus on placings, because we could literally have like first place in 99.9, second place in 99.8, third place in 99.7 if you guys all really wanted to just focus on scores. But it makes no relevance. It's just how we give each other gaps and whatnot. The first feature where Brendog goes right, straight air, where Whitlock does a lofty backflip into the first feature, where Whitlock's going to drop into his waterfall drop, which is 22 feet, straight down the mount into the chute that Clemens got taken out on, where Brendog is going to come around the side, cuts a line, does a little skipper into his line that goes into his step up. Whitlock is going to go into a 44-foot step down, suicide off of it. Good trick score there, where Brendog's going up his rock, nice step up into the rock off feature, which is 24 feet down, where Whitlock's on the ridge, kind of nibbling away at a few tricks here. Brendog is kind of traversing onto the ridge. It's got some little tricks there, a little suey off that hit there, where Whitlock's coming into his feature, super good. And then Brendog's got his canyon gap, 46 feet across, straight into the old Geordie waterfall drop, where Whitlock does a cork 3 on the bottom to finish off his run. And then back over to Brendog. It's got the waterfall drop, which ended up being 23 feet down, and then rolling into his final flip feature back into the corral. Now, trick score on both had good tricks. Whitlock did the big flip up top off the step down, where Brendog had the flip all over the canyon gap, and also a couple of little nibbler tricks in between. Brendog had some creativity, did something unique, different with the rock, stepping it up on this year, which brought him up. The reason I want to compare it to Whitlock's is, Whitlock scored lower than he did. And Whitlock had some very large features and very big mountain style riding in his line. And the reason that Brendog was above him is because of his creativity. He had a really cool step up onto the rock. He added a few things, and that was rewarded. Now, I just want to focus on the fact that this is a big mountain event, and all these riders are so close in terms of like ranking and where they all sat. And like when I first rolled into this venue, I was very aware at how close everyone was going to be, because this is, I believe this is the third year we're at this site. So what that usually means is riders are, using old lines that have been built, or like jumping on someone else's line, and they're adding to it. So it's getting like more honed in every time you do another event at an individual venue. I just want to remind you people that like it gets more dialed, more packed, and like people just really push the limits of every single line. So I knew that it was going to be a really close call at the end of the day. And, that's why I took it so seriously, like measuring every single lip landing, like noting on every single feature, like how much exposure was going in, how much exposure was going out. And that definitely gets weighted into your like line choice category, technicality of line, however you want to call it. And that gets weighted, and that's something that you just got to trust us, that we're up there looking at it, and it's impossible to see it on the TV screen, especially all those little factors. Like for instance, an example would be, most people wouldn't look at the step down that Zink went down on and say that that's a ton of exposure. I would have disagreed before this event happened. I was looking at it, and there's a ton of exposure, and unfortunately we all saw that. Zink went down on his landing, and he fell into like the worst spot possible, which was down a little canyon into a bunch of rocks, and it's horrible. And those are the kind of things that we as judges, we have to look at and evaluate. Okay, if this rider is going to jump this and potentially trick this, what are the possibilities of potentially a drastic situation? Because that has to be valued into that like line choice score. And it's something that I take very seriously, because myself, I've been taken out many times, riding and pushing this sport for the past 20 something years. And, I just want to make sure that every rider is, you know, given their dues on all the risks that they're taking. Is really, if a rider's gonna take his life in his hands and take huge risks, I need to make sure that they're going to be rewarded for that. And at the end of the day, at this event, a ton of riders, the majority of the riders, all took really high risks, and the level of the riding was so high. It's so hard to like really differentiate all of the riders in between each other, and you all need to just understand and trust in our ability to be able to look at all these things and factor them all in. So anyways, hope this helps everyone understand our judging criteria a little bit more. Anyways, have a great day. It was fun being there and cheering all the boys and all the girls on this year, and I hope you guys tune in for more, because we love this kind of stuff and it's all great. Chat soon.